Welcome back to Reading Between the Lines. Today I'm going to take you guys with me on a little narrative, and it's a theory of mine, and it's going to explain what happened with the conquest of America, what really happened, what they didn't tell us, and what it has to do with possibly Tartaria and what it has to do with the major world powers of today. So what I did is I went and I looked through a bunch of different books, basically taking quotes out and kind of piecing together the story underneath that they never talk about, the story that they leave out. And we're starting with the conquest of the Americas. With Columbus came over and he came here first, to Cuba, to Haiti, and all of these places. And he returned back to Spain with all this loot. He's got gold, he's got natives, he's got fruits, he's got all these different things that he brought back to show to the court. And that basically started off the kick for the conquistadors. Suddenly, everybody wants to go to the Americas to find the gold to make themselves rich. Now, according to the theory of Tartaria, or the mud flood theory, which it's hard to deny the mud flood theory, there was all of these buildings that were already here and that they have hidden from history. A lot of claims that they were built later, a lot of buildings were knocked down, a lot of just nobody said anything, a lot of just quietness or perhaps suppressed information. We know this. We know for sure that the only one that we do know about that they didn't manage to hide was the Mexico City one, the pyramids and the big city for the Aztecs. And they weren't able to do that because Columbus was first. That was when he first got to the Americas, and that was when he first plundered all the gold. That was before they realized that they should start keeping it under wraps. So this is just a quote. "The fate of the future empires and the distribution of races over the face of the earth depend on the painful deeds of a few adventurers, unrenowned native chieftains, and they themselves being like players whose names and private fortunes we do not care much about, but who are acting in some great drama, the story of which concerns the whole world." That explains the conquest of America in a nutshell. It is crazy how just a handful of people had so much to do with what happened next. So meanwhile, while the conquistadors are in America, going into Mexico, or in the Americas, going into Mexico, going into Brazil, Portugal went into Brazil, going into South America and going into all these places, going in for gold, slaves, anything they can get. Meanwhile, in Europe, this is the 1500s. There's quite a bit going on. At this point, Spain isn't, at first they're not even really interested in Columbus's journey. They don't think it's going to be very fruitful until he comes back. And then still, the crown really isn't that involved. It's just a bunch of private people who decide that they want to go try to make their fortune as they head over to the Americas. It hasn't really caught on anywhere else yet. Portugal's involved a little bit. Mostly it's just those two. England kind of gets going in the beginning of the middle of 1500s, but they also have colonies all over the rest of the world right now. They have, at this point, they're the major player as far as dominating the seas. They have all kinds of colonies in India, Africa, all over the place. None of the other countries are really that involved yet. France, not really. I mean, there's a few things here and there, but it's mostly just Britain and then now Spain. So this is Columbus bringing back the treasure, and he should have kept it quiet, but he didn't. He let on about all this gold. This is actually, there was a shipwreck from one of the Spanish fleets, and that lost a bunch of gold, and this was found recently. So there was so much gold, it was just in chunks. It was just, it's insane the amount of gold that they brought back. And what made me start looking into this is I was thinking, what happened to all that gold? Because there was a lot, you guys, a lot. I mean, the Spanish treasure ships were coming back every year, 11, 12 full ships filled to the brim with treasure. And I mean, this went on for decades. They got in early. They were the first ones to get in there because of Columbus. Portugal got involved a little bit, but mostly it was just the people who, they were actually Spaniards. They weren't necessarily representatives of the crown, but they definitely were representatives of the church. The church had their hands in this from the very beginning. And to me, that is something that needs to be looked into a little bit more. But going back to the whole idea of secrecy, this is Puerto Rico. And I found a story while I was reading today, and I couldn't find it again because I was reading so many things, but a story about, it was the year 1518, and an English ship had wandered into the port of Puerto Rico. This is the first time the English have gone into any port that the Spanish basically controlled. They may have been up here already, I'm not sure. I think they were in like 1509 or something up here, but this is the first time they've come down into these waters. So what happens is the governor or magistrate or whoever it was there that was Spanish, that was in Puerto Rico, they fired upon the English ship because they didn't want them to embark, because they didn't want them to come and try to claim anything. Now, the Spanish at this time also had a policy of, they said they wouldn't do any trade at all with any other country, which kind of ended up screwing them in the end. But so the English ship was fired upon and turned around and sailed away. Now, when the word got back to the crown, to Queen Isabella about this, I think it was a viceroy. The viceroy actually got in trouble because she told him that what he should have done was seize the ship and not let them travel back across to Europe to tell people about where these new ports were. Because if you know anything about the Caribbean right there, there's a lot of islands. This is all dotted with a whole lot of different islands. And if they made it to Puerto Rico, then they were likely to have seen at least other islands, or that was basically what the Spanish at that time, they were plundering, and they wanted it all to themselves. The Spanish, now at this time too, Spanish and the Catholic Church were very intertwined, very intertwined. The Spanish king was actually also the Holy Roman Emperor, and they were in control of all of this, a bunch of this, and they also had a bunch of stuff in Africa. But they were also tied up with the conquering the Moors, so it was still just mostly private enterprises coming in and looting the Americas. That doesn't mean the crown didn't get their cut, and that also doesn't mean that the church wasn't getting their cut, but they still wanted it all to themselves. So there was so much gold. This is just an example. This is one of the Indian chiefs or something in South America. Somebody had noticed this, that it was on an appointed day. He was anointed with turpentine. I don't even know why there would be turpentine, but rolled on a bed of gold dust, covered him into a golden statue as he stood naked on a raft. When the sun shone full upon him, surrounded by his nobles on the raft, he offered up his prayers and cast offerings of gold and emeralds into the depths of a big, I think it was a lake. So there's so much gold, so much minerals, that this guy's rolling around in it, seriously, literally, and just throwing it into the lake as a sacrifice. It's insane. I mean, this whole, I don't think that we'll ever know how much gold was taken out of this area, out of this continent and this continent. It must have just been insane. So much so that it's weird that Spain is poor at this point. And what I honestly think that the Catholic Church ended up with it. This is the Spaniards just plundering and taking down some of their idols. Now what happened is the church got involved very early on. This was in 1494, because see, Portugal was the one that had most of the maps that Columbus used, so that's how they were involved. So it was Portugal and Spain, and they were fighting over who got what. And so the Pope decided, he decided, okay, I'm going to put this line right here, and he said everything on this side is for Spain, and everything on this side is Portugal. Looks kind of like Portugal got the bad end of the deal there, but that's probably because they didn't have as much ties to the Pope, and they weren't quite as intertwined. They also weren't giving as much tribute or tithes or whatever you would call it. So, but why would the Pope, why would the church feel like they had jurisdiction to do this? Now we know that the Catholic Church would stick their nose into anything, but the thing is at this time there were laws colonists, everyone in Europe followed a same set of rules basically when it came to colonizing other places. It had to do with who got there first. It had to do, there's just a whole set of rules. And of course the Indians didn't apply, but all of the countries and monarchs did. It's the same thing as like there's maritime rules for like abandoned ships, for, you know, ghost ships, or treasure that you can find that's in the waters, you know, and isn't on the land of anywhere, so it's kind of unclaimed. There's different laws that are applied, like who gets there first and all of these things. It's the same kind of idea as that. And they all kind of followed the same rules for some reason. I don't know, to avoid war, I guess. And so Pope Alexander, he issued a papal bull or a decree. This is when he decided that this was part of the deal, and asserts the right of Spain and Portugal to colonize, convert, and enslave. It also justifies the enslavement of Africans. Okay, so yeah, there was a lot. When you're looking into the histories of anything, slavery is brought up over and over and over and over, which actually is kind of a red flag to me. I think that it's sometimes used as a distraction to keep people from looking into other things. If you want to look up the history of slavery, there is so much out there to find. But when you're looking into other things, it's pretty sparse. Like again, when I was looking to find the story about the English ship that went to Puerto Rico that got fired upon, I couldn't even find it again anywhere. And I looked. But if you want to know about slavery, it's everywhere. So anyways, this is what he said. Out of our own soul largus and certain knowledge, that's what I'm saying here, okay? Pay attention to that. And out of the fullness of our apostolic power, by the authority of Almighty God conferred upon us in blessed Peter, and of the vicarship of Jesus Christ, which we hold on earth, do by tenor these presents, if that's basically telling Spain and Portugal that they can have this part of the world. But it says certain knowledge. So that certain knowledge, did it have anything to do with the fact that there were buildings already here that kind of looked Roman in nature? I mean, this is Lisbon, I think, and this is in the 1600s, early 1600s, and they had only been there for a few years at that point. There's aqueducts all over Mexico that are really, really old, right? There's things like this. This came after a drought. This emerged, and they say it was built in the 16th century, but how did they know? I think it was built before that. Then out of this book here, I found more stuff like this. Like, okay, this church here had a legend behind it. It was built in 15 something, which means it was built like 20 years after Columbus got there. So it's a pretty nice church for so quickly being built. And there's a legend surrounding it. It says, the traditional story is that the work on the church was done by angels on a single night, and that the bishop was greatly astonished when he came in the morning and found everything completed. There's 2 or 3 churches that have legends like that in this book, okay? And this book was written about 100 years ago. 2 or 3 of them. And yeah, angels. It's kind of like that other thing with the Basque, where they had or no, they had giants that would come and build things when everyone was sleeping. It means it was already built, guys. That's what it means. And out of that book, I found a couple of cool things. Um, so in 1908, there was a newspaper article in Mexico talking about how somebody is tearing down the thick walls of a convent in Mexico that was supposed to be built in the 1600s. And it's really sad that they tore all these things down. It really breaks my heart. But so these walls were 10 feet thick, is what they were saying. 10 feet thick. Nobody was building walls that were 10 feet thick in the 1600s in Mexico. They were too busy stealing gold from everybody. They weren't doing that. And it's interesting. It says the walls covered an area of 4 city blocks and had sunk by their own weight, okay, 10 feet thick, into the subsoil. That's mud flood right there. So their claim is that the building actually sunk into the ground. Maybe that's what happened in some of those mud flood deals. I mean, yeah, it's kind of the same thing. Either the mud was washed in or the dirt became loose somehow and the building sank, right? But 10 feet thick, that wasn't happening in the 1600s. It just wasn't. And then like this one here, supposedly built, I think, in the late 1600s. It has a waterway around it with aqueducts and a fountain. And there's buckets attached to the sides of the well, and they're still used by thousands who believe that the water has not only medicinal but miraculous healing power. And I think this one might even have an organ in here. But look at that. So people still, at this point, I think this was 100 years ago, they were going to these churches and they were getting the water from the cisterns around it, and because they had healing powers, right? So yeah. So anyway, so Rome feels like it has jurisdiction and certain knowledge of the New World, enough so where they have authority to split it up and give it away. Okay. Now, of course, they're going to get their tribute. You know that they're going to. And it's funny. So here Columbus is, or this might be Cortez, and he comes and he tells the Indians that they basically, it's funny because the Indians don't even speak the language at this time, and they're just so pompous. It's just unbelievable. So they they make the same proclamation to the Indians, and they say, what is this? Let's see. They declare how God gave charge to all these nations to one man called Saint Peter, which is the Pope, that he should be the head of the human race and have rule over all, and his seat is in Rome, at the fittest place for governing in the world. Anyway, and then they tell these Indians that that because the Pope gave them permission, that now they are sovereigns of all the Western islands in the Western continent. So they're basically saying, this is why we can rule over you, which the Indians just didn't understand even, which is really sad. So, I mean, if you look at Mexican architecture, it's amazing. It really is amazing. So then we get to this point where the Spanish realize after this, ship comes to Puerto Rico, and they realize like, uh-oh. And even the conquistadors, they're starting to infight, and they're starting to have issues with each other because the way that they're treating the Indians are really, really bad. And some of them have problems with it. Some of them want, they keep appealing to the crown and saying, oh, but this guy took this part and I want it. And favors are being traded and secrets are going back and forth. And so finally they realize that, maybe they ought to be more quiet about the whole thing. And suddenly it's really hard to find any information about anything going on around the whole colonization process. Just all of a sudden, it's really hard. And this is a historian that's kind of lamenting on that. He says, the foreigners best qualified to speak on, he was talking about how little information there is after a certain point. Said the foreigners best qualified to speak usually remain silent, mindful of the fact that it is in general presumptuous for a man to speak of a country not his own, and especially aware of the sensitiveness of the Latin America to criticism, realizing how irrevocable is the printed word, how, I'm not even going to try that one, to their own personal interests, frank speech may be, how readily their motives may be questioned and their views misunderstood, they often lack the courage to step forward and courage to make the mistakes of fact and of judgment that inevitably creep into any book, and the courage to expose themselves to attack and hostile criticism. So he's making an excuse for why the information basically from the New World just shut down. Suddenly it's just, you get a few reports back, and even the conquistadors and their diaries and stuff, they stop elaborating. They get really skimpy on information. Now there is some of the diaries, some of the stuff has ended up in the Vatican and is sealed and is unavailable. A lot of the Jesuits, the stuff the Jesuits did, but they didn't come around until 1540 is when the Jesuit order was established. And the reason that it was established was because the Protestant Reformation started, which basically started a war, kind of like a Cold War in a way, between the Roman Catholic Church and the Protestants. They wanted to squash the Protestant movement. They didn't want anything to do with it. They wanted complete control over Christendom, the tithes, the money, the power, all of it. So the Jesuits formed in order to, their first initial goal, or their whole reason they were chartered, was to squash the Protestant Reformation. They wanted to bring, stop it in its tracks and get everybody back to the church. So, and the Roman Catholic Church was really bad during this time. I mean, they were awful. So let's see. So yeah, so the materials for this portion of Mexican history are exceedingly scant, because these people, they realize, we've talked too much. Everybody's going to want to come and get this gold from us. So people stop talking. And so the jealous despotism and ecclesiastical vigilance of old Spanish rule and the anarchy of modern miscalled republicanism, few authors have ventured to penetrate the gloom of this mysterious period. The Jesuit Father Cavo and Don Carlos Maria Bustamante have alone essayed to narrate consecutively the events of the viceroyalty, and although no student of the past is attracted to, and it goes on going that. So basically what he's saying is that the Jesuits are the only ones that give us any information from now until about 1740, when they're expelled from the South American colonies. So the next little bit, I didn't even get any history on. It's basically just the Jesuits patting themselves on the back, talking about how they're colonizing, how they're converting these poor Indian savages, and all the talk about gold just kind of disappears. There's no more gold. It's not about that anymore, according to the Jesuits. And then something happened. It's unclear why the Jesuits were expelled, but they were expelled 1767. That's right before the American Revolution, right before, there was a bunch of revolutions in that part of the world at that time. And what happened, I think, is that the Spanish crown and the Catholic Church the Spanish crown started to kind of take over, or they were trying to kick the church out of their business, right? And the church was like, no, you're not going to do that to us. So what the Jesuits did, is they instigated all these rebellions, all kinds of rebellions in the entire, all over the South American continent. And this is around the time of the American Revolution, and it was like the era of revolutions, and the Jesuits were making it happen in the South America. So the Spanish were kind of getting kicked out, and so they got pissed off, and they kicked the Jesuits out. And this is just a comment of the king or to other grounds is somewhat doubtful. Oh, this is one thing. It was just on 2 pages. So whether the expulsion of the Jesuits from the Spanish domains was due to the liberal ideas of the king or to other grounds is somewhat doubtful. The immediate causes for this, in many respects, mistaken actions have remained obscure. So that's a long sentence to just say we don't know what happened. One thing is certain: the wealth of the Jesuits had increased enormously. Except it, according to the Jesuits, there was no more gold left anywhere that the Spanish had already gotten it all. But we're pretty sure that's not true. So anyway, so Luther caused all this havoc in Europe, and suddenly it became the papists against the Protestants. And it was, they did not like each other. Let's put it that way. It's funny. This is from that history of Mexican churches. A painting was added to one of the churches, and it represents the Pope in a triumphal car drawn by a very plump angel. They are passing over the bodies of reformers, Luther and Calvin, being dragged behind in chains. That was a painting commissioned by the Pope. I mean, he was not happy about this Protestant Reformation. So this is basically, okay, so this is King Henry, his son, Queen Mary of Scots, and then Elizabeth. So talking about what's going on in England is, so the Protestant Reformation really got going because King Henry decided to break away from the church, from the Catholic Church, and start his own church, the Church of England. Now, all of this makes me think, okay, I don't think we're told the right reason why he did this. We're told it's because he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn. But that's kind of frivolous, right? I think that that is a distraction. I think that what he did is he made a bold move to try to take control of the Reformation in order to be a competition with the Pope or with the Vatican. See, because at that point, the church was the single richest entity, still is actually, the single richest entity in the world. And it was quite a bold move to step away from them and try to compete with them. And what ended up happening is, what I think is that the Church of England has now the second richest church or entity in the world. Excuse me. Sorry, my dogs are crazy. So now the Church of England is the second richest entity in the world today, right? The Crown of England. And they're still the only monarchy that has managed to really hold any kind of power. All the monarchies in Europe really are nothing anymore. So here we are. This is at the beginning of it. He says, the history tells us it's because of Anne Boleyn. Such a bold move like that, that was really world-changing, fortune-changing, and dangerous, actually. I don't think it was for something as frivolous as a divorce. I really don't. I think that was a ruse. So then his son was king for a little while. He was a Protestant. And then here comes Mary. She somehow the Pope managed to get her on the throne in England for 5 years. And during that time, she wreaked havoc. She was hanging people, burning people all over England. Anybody who wasn't practicing or wasn't going to mass like twice a week, I think, or anybody who had any of the new copies of the Bible that wasn't the Latin Vulgate, basically she had a war against Protestantism, and she took it out on the people of England. And that's why they call her Bloody Mary. It was really ugly. So Queen Elizabeth I managed to get the throne from her, managed to get the crown from her. And so at this point, it's a war between the English crown and the Catholic Church. They are at each other. I mean, they're at each other's throats. It's a war. But see, it can't be an all-out war because the Catholic Church isn't really a state. And at that point, they didn't really have an army. So it's the only way they can wage this war is through money, really. I mean, after Mary got off the throne, there wasn't any other throne for the Catholic Church to steal because he basically had control of everyone else. So that's when it goes back to, there's still treasure ships coming out of Spain, coming out of the Americas, going back to Spain. So what Queen Elizabeth did is she empowered piracy, or privateers, basically. And what started happening, this was her boyfriend, basically. It's rumored, and they say that, I mean, he was a pirate, and he was her favorite. But they say that what actually started happening is there was a war on the seas, this is the Jolly Roger flag, and this was actually the Knights Templar flag, and that was the pirate that was on their side. They were attacking the Spanish ships, stealing the gold for the Catholic Church. And then there was the privateers. Sir Francis Drake is just one example, who were attacking and commandeering Spanish ships for the British crown. So the Spanish were kind of screwed, you know what I mean? They were just, this is in the Caribbean. There were pirates everywhere, and they were having a really hard time getting their treasure back to the old country. And this is something that I'm going to do another video on. You know, it's funny, the distractions that they try to make us not look into things. Remember this movie, The Pirates of the Caribbean? I watched it. I don't even remember what it was about. I don't remember the plot. It was just a lot of action, and it was really goofy. And I think it was meant to kind of make the whole pirate era, to downplay it, to make it seem silly, to because I do remember there was a lot of British colonials in there, but there wasn't a lot. It was like ghosts and stuff. It was really dumb. And I think they put that movie out on purpose, so that kind of to move the cultural mindset away from the whole privateer, the golden age of piracy, basically, in the Caribbean, because they don't want anybody looking into it. I was just barely looking into it, and I will make a video on it, and I already ran across this in the history of the Buccaneers of America. I ran across this author. He was describing some of the islands in the Caribbean, the different attributes that they have, and he mentions one race on one group of islands, and he says some have conjectured them to be of Tartar extraction, like Tartaria, which corresponds with the belief that they emigrated from North America. So at this point in time, the way he says this, because he wrote this in the 1700s, it was pretty much known that the Tartarians were in North America. And I thought that was interesting, and I just barely started doing looking into the piracy deal. I felt like I had to go through this and to explain the whole thing before I do a pirate video. But who knows what else I'm gonna find? Because really, at that point in time, the world was split up. This is the papal. This is like the Pope, you know, has control of this area, and this is the Protestants, okay? And then this is Muslim, who weren't really on the seas yet, not much, a little bit, but more like privateers. So at this time, it's these groups, it's this group to this group that are fighting over all the gold, right? And they're basically, what was I saying? Yeah, so they're fighting over all the gold in the seas, and they're leaving it to whoever's left, the conquistadors that are left in South America, to finish getting all that gold out, and they're waiting till it's out, and they're taking it from the seas, right? So at this point, the only people that have colonized anything, this is still 1500, so there's not a lot of colonies that are established in the North America yet. Not a lot. And everything down here is basically under control of the Catholic Church, but mostly it's just, there's not a whole lot of colonists. There's basically forts, you know, with some Spanish viceroys, a lot of bishops. A lot of places are actually controlled by bishops. A lot of bishops are the governors of a lot of the areas by now, so the church has a lot more control at this point. And so it's really easy to control, and they're being quiet because they don't want anybody else in there to steal their stuff. So they're not talking much. Now the people here are just barely coming in, and it's just a couple of small groups, and it's pretty easy to control what kind of information comes out of there because there's only one or two people that are going back. And it's easy to keep them quiet if you want them to be quiet about the kind of wealth and opportunities that are over here, right? So since the world is split into those two, and the English colonists, it's easy to keep them quiet too because they don't want the Pope to decide that he has jurisdiction over this stuff too because of the same buildings that were down here, right? Because he was claiming that he had certain knowledge So they don't want anybody to know what's going on up here because they don't want the Pope to come down there and say, oh yeah, this was Roman as well. This is ours. We own this. And then to start a war, to have any issues. They just want it quiet for themselves. So it's easy to keep the elite quiet, but how do you keep the regular colonists quiet? In both places, just the regular people, the people that are the laborers and things. How do you keep them quiet? It's easy to keep the Indians quiet because they don't talk. They're not going to volunteer any information anyways. Plus, most of them are in slavery by now. So this is about the time that both the Spanish Inquisition was starting in full force, as well as the Protestant witch trials. This is the Catholic version. This is the Protestant version. This is how they kept people quiet. If somebody wouldn't do what they said, or if somebody was talking too much or anything, all they had to do was put them on trial. They could execute them as they like. They could torture them as they like. And it would also keep people in so much fear of stepping out of line that they're not going to be venturing out. Only the elites who are free of this would venture out, but even some elites were caught up into this. Anybody who stepped wrong, they had an avenue to take care of it, an avenue that was free of search warrants, free of actual crimes, free of everything. It was the perfect excuse to take care of all of that. And what that ended up doing was making it easy for the two main powers of the world, the British Crown and what would become the Vatican, the Roman Catholic Church, make it easy for them to keep all their gold and continue to rule the world. Because if you think about it, the amount of gold and riches in the world that is concentrated with these two entities is insane. So all that pirate gold, all of that, the Templars brought it to Rome, and then the privateers brought it to the crown. And then these things are in place to keep everyone quiet, so until they could take care of taking out those buildings in North America, because they didn't have the excuse of building these big Catholic churches, right? They had no excuse. They couldn't build these big Catholic churches in North America because they're Protestant. So they had to do something. So that's why most of them are torn down. In Mexico, they still stand because they said, oh, the Catholics built it. Anyway, so that's my theory. Tell me what you think in the comments. Like and subscribe. I apologize for my dogs. Next time I will put them outside before I make a video. All right, you guys have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later.